let's start with, just your speech today and what message, you talked about, fraud and corruption, but what message do you hope that fraud examiners will take from your message today and into the world and into work?
Well, first, that the fight against fraud and corruption is far from one. Therefore, they're very, very much needed to continue their work, and they must be strong and be principled. Second, I hope they will also get that to aid the fight against fraud and corruption, we need countries, governments, institutions that are strong, that have processes, procedures. We need governments or countries to have institutions that are strong. So fighting fraud and corruption, it requires certain things to be in place to make it possible. So I hope they take away those two. And then secondly, or thirdly, I would say, I hope they'll take away the fact that for developing countries, since you have so many developing country chapters, it's not good enough just fighting fraud and corruption in country. You also need to fight it outside, because a lot of the stolen money goes to acquire illegal and illicit assets outside. And if those countries that are receiving these monies say no to corruption, they also need to have strong institutions that say no and send these monies back and refuse these kinds of illicit flows a haven. So you need to fight on both sides. So three messages.
One of the things that I've noticed is that our Nigerian members are so energetic and enthusiastic in fighting fraud. And I thought maybe you could talk a little bit more. And you touched upon it during the interview with the auntie. But I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about fraud and corruption in Nigeria and how that's shaped, our members who are so passionate about fighting fraud.
Well, I hesitate to make any assumptions about the members and why they're here. But that is to say that we've got a country like several others. It's not unique, but in Nigeria, because it's a large country, has had natural resources, oil assets, oil and gas, which I think have underpinned a mindset and an approach, where it's easy to, in some ways, to manipulate and capture some of those resources for personal gain. I think that they see that a lot of the corruption that has happened over time in the country has really undermined the country and set it back. So it's not just a question of one person acquiring wealth here, another person there, but over time, the systematic diversion of resources in several governments and administrations has impoverished the country, in my view, and I've written about it. So resources that could be used for development are diverted. So I think those who want to do the right thing in Nigeria, I think this is what makes them passionate. How do we stop this enrichment of self or a group or a clan or my political friends or groupings at the expense of others? I also think that a lot of what is called petty corruption in the literature also abounds in the country. And comes from a variety of sources and reasons. Policemen taking bribes, customs officials taking bribes. Sometimes there's nothing that should excuse it, but people supplementing their salaries by doing the wrong thing. And petty corruption can be corrosive in the manner I said. So I think that animates a lot of people who want to stop the undermining of development by the grand theft of politicians and public officials, and the petty corruption that is socially corrosive through the daily encounters you have with officials or with police or with people like that. Yeah. So I'm not surprised that they're very animated. The issue for them is how willing are they to speak up? It's not easy. It has consequences. How willing are they to speak truth to power when they find that there's corruption and mismanagement? And maybe, as a group, of belonging to an association as powerful as yours, they can use that to speak up more. So it's not an individual thing. Somebody saying, I found this and I want, no. The association, we're from the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, and we think this is the wrong way to do things.
Are there any barriers or difficulties that they would have in Nigeria, within their companies to like speak up?
Well, I don't think it's peculiar to Nigeria. I think in anywhere you work, if you're a whistleblower, there are certain consequences. And if your company, for instance, does not have established procedures for protecting whistleblowers, then you're at risk. I don't care what country it is, developing, whatever. It's the same. So that's why people may be hesitant because of personal risk to their family. You heard what I said when in my account about what happened to my mother,
Right.
and the threats to myself. So it can be quite dangerous. So your association, I think, needs to have these people really insist on companies they work with, if they're in companies, having whistleblower protection and no protection against retaliation for staff who may report something.
In your book, fighting corruption is dangerous, and you talked about how you took on like the oil subsidies. Could you talk a little bit about, what you did with the oil subsidies and how that, affected you, and what that did for your country?
Well, it was a big story, and it actually became an issue that went to parliament and went everywhere. Because when I came back as finance minister the second time, from 2011 to 2015, as I said, the numbers were showing something that was strange. If when I left, let's say 4 or 5 years back, the oil subsidy was running at about $2 billion, how could the subsidy have ballooned, 6 times from 2 billion to about 12? Even if you take into account population growth, the increase in wealth of the middle class who would be demanding more fuel, this, that, and the other, it couldn't happen. So to me, once I saw the numbers, there was obviously something very wrong. And the same was the conclusion of the then Director General of the Budget, Dr. Bright Okogu, who was the first to show me the numbers and say, we've already paid 8 billion and this bill is still coming. It's once we saw that something was wrong and there were so many rumors that there was massive fraud going on, then that led to saying to the president, would you give me permission to just audit these subsidy accounts and see if these people are really telling the truth about the amount of oil they brought in and the amount of subsidy they're owed? And President Goodluck Jonathan then was very supportive. And so we actually decided to go for a very high level. The MD of one of our biggest banks, Mr. Aigi Mokwede, took time off from his work to lead a technical team that would look at this. And they did. They went everywhere. They went to the oil depots where some of these marketers said that they had stored the oil they brought in. The ground truthing. They spoke to so many people. They did everything possible to check and found that there were so many lies and so much fraud about how much they brought in. In one case, there was a ship, they said, that brought in oil resources, the oil into the country. And when they traced the ship's movements in Lloyd's Register, this is something that, is amazing you can do. Lloyd's Register in London follows the movement of all the ships around the world. They found that the ship, they said the oil came in, this particular company reported it, was not even in West African waters at the time. So that was clearly a fraudulent claim. So all of this totaled to 2.4 billion. And it was so massive that there was just no way and once we reported to the president. He may actually turn the task force from reporting to me to reporting to him, because it was so dangerous and the amounts were so high. Once we found that it was really necessary that we start working on it, and also the National Assembly had hearings over the matter and so on. So it became a big national issue. And that way we were able to fight and not pay the monies and look to block these marketers from their activities.
Let's talk a little bit about tariffs and possible fraud in tariffs. I mean, that's a policy that might happen, it might not. um, so, how can the World Trade Organization support countries in fighting fraud and tariffs?
Well, you don't necessarily it's not because you have a tariff, you have fraud. I just want to be clear about that.
Right.
You can have high tariffs, and the high tariffs are paid by those who are supposed to pay them without any fraudulent activity. But it is the case sometimes that when tariffs are really high, then the incentive for tariff evading paying the tariffs becomes really high. And that can lead to fraud. And we find in many countries, including many developing countries, that this can be an issue. Instead of paying, the same thing with completely banning a good. And a lot of economists would support this. A lot of studies have shown, for instance, banning a good is like, I don't know what percent tariff. It just leads to an incentive to smuggle it. And practical experience has shown that when you ban a good completely that people really need, it is smuggled in one way or the other. And it's actually better to charge higher tariffs than complete bans. Then from that to really high tariffs leads to incentives to pay under the table something to a customs official, and then they allow you to pay something lower and so on. And I think that the best way to deal with these things really, as I said, is digitization. And using technology to remove the human interaction as much as you can in customs. And trade facilitation, we have, as I said, an agreement that supports that has shown the hundreds of billions of dollars saved in so many countries by just digitizing and streamlining so many of these procedures. So that's how you deal with it. So it removes that human interaction. You fill your papers, you pay, all kind of automated. And that's the way that is most efficient to deal with it. And of course, avoiding putting impossibly high tariffs when they are not necessary. Sometimes they are used as a protection so that, countries can manufacture the goods. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. It's an incentive to those who want to do the wrong thing because they can get around it under the table.
So what is, a typical day for you, like as the Director General of a trade organization?
I'm not sure there's a typical day,
Typical day.
especially these days that, you have the tariff and trade wars going on. But my day is usually filled with meetings, back to back to back. And that is because trade policy and trade rules are things that really, they hit they're very political in a way. You talk about trade, it's all political. Agricultural trade hits farmers, and in every country, agriculture and farmers are huge lobby. Services, you have huge lobbies in trade, which means that trade ministers and leaders are constantly on edge about trade issues. So international trade issues can also be domestic issues. And that is why. So feeding into my day, why am I saying all this? On a typical day, I have ministers who have come in to try and talk about their issues in their countries and, how the WTO does or is not helping them in what they want to achieve. Usually with, many inquiries and complaints about how things are not working, but also sometimes, surprisingly, some praise for how the rules of the organization are helping them manage particular situations. So you have that. Many typically asking for help. I have a lot of leaders from developing countries who've come because they require technical assistance and they want some help to be able to solve particular problems in complying with WTO rules. I have countries that want to accede who are having meetings with different members and wanted to also see me. And then we have lots of meetings statutory of different committees dealing with different aspects of our agreements. We have negotiations going on, and I often have to either go and join or chair a meeting dealing with our negotiations of fishery subsidies, agricultural subsidies, issues on digital trade and services. And then I often receive, delegations from abroad who want to talk about what the WTO is doing. On a typical day, and of course you have internal staff issues and meetings, but my day typically is dealing with a lot of outside-facing meetings, as well as meetings of members in plenary or committee. Yeah.
So, what led you to a career in economics? What is it about economics that made you want to do this?
Well, it's very interesting because I actually didn't. Because my father was not only an economist, but a mathematical economist. He had a degree in mathematical economics and statistics. That's what he did his PhD in. So I actually grew up with, and he was an academic throughout most of my life, and then later became the king in our part of the country. But I grew up with a lot of economics books, and I used to, when he would be preparing his lectures, I used to pepper him with questions on this, on that, and he would be in the study to make this, and to keep me quiet, he would just give me the textbook. Later on, I found it was Samuelson or something, and say, read chapter 1 and tell me about it, and it was so boring. That I decided that I was like 9, 10, 11. I wasn't ever going to do that because it was the most boring thing, and I'd be reading it and crying. So it says, sit here in the study and read this chapter. So I actually didn't set out, but I think when I got to university at Harvard, and I was, you in the U.S. a little bit different. In our system in Nigeria and in the UK, you have to choose a concentration almost immediately. In the US, they give you a little bit of time to take different courses for a year before you decide what your major will be. And, when I took, I knew I was going to be in the social sciences. And when I took the economics courses, I actually found them very interesting. And I thought that they diagnosed so many things going on in society. We had an excellent instructor in my first economics class. He would take the newspaper and look at an article, and then he would tell you the economics underlying it, and that fascinated me, that everyday things could be explained by this discipline. I think that's what led me to decide I'm going to major in this. And of course, my father was delighted.
Do I have time for just one more question? Okay, so you touched on this a little bit, and I wanted to talk a little bit more about being a woman in a very, male-dominated field. And so what were some barriers or challenges that you faced early on in your career and even now?
Well, it's not just that I'm a woman, but I'm a woman of color. And I'm an African, and when you walk into a room, people have different expectations, So I think, but I'm also Nigerian, and I think being a Nigerian uniquely helped me. I think, first of all, the expectations of you are that you're not going to be smart, or you're not going to produce or say anything that will meaningfully change things. And my father sort of really anticipated that. And he said, you have to go to the best schools. Anywhere you go. He said, if it's at home, if it's abroad, any country, you must go to the best universities because, when you are a young female African, you might encounter a lot of barriers and prejudice. But if you're well prepared, technically, in whatever profession, and he didn't tell me what profession in the end, even though he was happy. He said you have to be extremely well prepared technically. That gives you a shot, but you need there'll be a lot of barriers. It's just the barriers are people assuming you don't know your material, people not expecting you to step up and be able to handle the issue because you look a certain way. They have preconceived notions of what you know and how you know it. And so you can see it. You can even feel it when you walk into a room. But being Nigerians are a bit oblivious.
What do you mean by that?
You're brought up in a country in which people think they're very egalitarian and they think they're as good as anyone else. And it's a large country, so it's a very competitive country as well. So you grew up in that environment, and in addition to all the advice I got from my father, I think it prepared me well. So you're trying to tell Nigerians they can't do something or they're not good enough. They're not even noticing you most of the time because they already believe they can do it. And they've grown up in an atmosphere in which they're expected to do it. Do you understand? So I that helped me a lot. I went to competitive schools. We compete a lot in competitive exams. And so even when I noticed, I didn't let it get to me, and that's my advice to people. If you're a woman and you can see that people are not giving you your due, don't let it get to you. Go in there if the expectations are limited. Show them what you can do. And what I've learned in life is that once you master your material and you know what you're talking about, people soon forget whether you're African, black, woman, or whatever. They start listening to what you actually have to say. And that has been proven over and over again. And then you overcome all those prejudices and all the thinking. And then people are listening to you, and very soon you're working with them and you're overcoming, and they believe you can do it. So I think being technically well prepared has stood me in good stead all through my career. Ignoring any anything that looked like prejudice has served me well, and not letting it even bother me. Not that I would agree with it or like it, but just don't give those people their due. They think you can do something, go ahead and blast it. Do it. Yeah, but it requires a lot of work. And this is what all women leaders tell me. They prepare so much and so carefully, more than their male colleagues, because there's that expectation. And this is whether they're black or white, by the way. But when you're black, it's even worse.